REAP Food Group is advocating for the continued support for schools to buy food from area farms. REAP is an organization that works to connect farmers to local markets. Allison Pfaff Harris is the farm-to-school director for REAP. She says when national food supply chains broke during the COVID-19 pandemic, the federal government came up with the Local Food for Schools program. It directed money to help schools buy food from local farms. Wisconsin schools were supposed to get $9 million this year, but the U.S. Department of Agriculture canceled the program. Allison says that in addition to REAP asking the federal government to continue the LFS program, they're also looking at a state alternative to continue that funding because the demand is there.
Schools have asked for so long for funding to be able to purchase from local farms. And so when I can make the argument that this funding should have been in place long ago, but it took the pandemic with those broken supply chains to really put this funding in place. And $3.4 million was brought into the state. Huge success. For every dollar that was invested from that program, we saw between $1 and $2 return for the local economy.
Because it was a COVID program, that's how it started. Did you expect it to come to an end?
At the time, we were like, this is a one-time infusion. Let's make the most of it. Department of Public Instruction collected a lot of data, did a report, sent you a couple of reports over. There's a one-pager and then there's a more detailed report because we really, even though schools have been asking for this funding for a long time, we really wanted to take this opportunity with the $3.4 million to show that this was a great investment for farms, a great investment for schools. And so we didn't expect the funding to continue, but we kept asking. Schools kept asking, farmers kept asking, folks who are supporters like REAP and other nonprofits and other community groups kept asking for this funding. And then late last year, we received word that Wisconsin was going to receive $9 million to continue this program. It was going to be rebranded a little bit to the LFSCC. So it's the Local Food for Schools and Child Care Centers. So an expansion. And we were thrilled to be able to see this money coming into the state.
Were any contracts in place when the announcement was made that the funding was gone?
There wasn't any funding distributed out to schools and farmers, but because we had heard that this $9 million was coming in, farmers were starting to plan, schools were getting excited. And so it's just a real blow to folks in this industry that this funding went away.
I want to underscore the demand. Give us a sense of, just how many schools are asking for this. What is the ripple effect for the farm economy in Wisconsin when schools have these food agreements?
So I mentioned that because of this LFS and this data that we had, just talking dollars and cents, that economic impact again, for every dollar that was invested in LFS, we saw between a $1 and $2 investment. Prior to my time at REAP Food Group, I actually worked with the Department of Public Instruction for 5 years as a school nutrition auditor. And so I traveled the state and got to meet school nutrition directors and folks across the state of Wisconsin, largest districts down to those teeny tiny K through 12 buildings. And I will tell you, I never met folks in school nutrition who said, I don't want to purchase from local farms. Most of the time they were like, I want to purchase from those local farms. Those are investments in my community. Those are investments in the people that I live and work with. Knowing that schools have been asking for this funding far before the pandemic, and it took this upside down world in order to bring it in, just a really, really unfortunate blow to school nutrition programs and farmers alike.
Now, is the ask for the administration to reverse its decision? Is that what the push we're hearing from REAP Food Group? Wisconsin Farmers Union has been vocal about this, as well as the governor.
Yes. So our push is to ask the federal government to reverse it. One of the other things that REAP Food Group is asking for is for our state government to think about creating a local food for schools program here in Wisconsin. Governor Evers released his budget. He said it's the most kid-friendly budget, so including a lot of support for school nutrition programs in that budget. And we'd also like to see, as the Joint Finance Committee is currently looking at that proposed budget that Governor Evers put out, we'd also like them to consider, hey, could we put in more funding that's similar to that federal LFS or LFCC program? Can we create something like that here in the state of Wisconsin?
We hear about farm to school initiatives all the time, not through this program specifically. So what makes this one unique and unlike maybe some of the options that are already available for farm to school?
Just to ground everyone who's listening, farm to school, when people go, well, what exactly is it that you do, Allison? So farm to school I describe as a movement that can be done by schools, community members, parents, students, anyone who has an interest in supporting local food education, school gardens, and local food procurement or local food purchasing. What made the LFS and this infusion of funding so different, it was that direct support for school nutrition programs to be able to purchase from local farms. I think it's really important for the audience to know that school nutrition programs, the way that their funding works is based on participation. Yes, they're located in a school, but they're not receiving those property tax dollars to support their program. They are a little individual business that operates within the school. And the way that they receive their funding is by participation. So the more students that you have participating in the program, the more funding that you have coming in the form of reimbursement to support your program. And that's funding that's not only for food, but that's to pay your staff, that's to pay your infrastructure, your equipment fixes. And even if you do have really great participation, it's still razor thin margins that you're working with. So this LFS or LFCC was just that assistance to be able to say, this funding is for you schools to be able to go and purchase from your neighbors, to go and be able to purchase from your community members.
Allison, as you continue to push for the local Food for Schools program to continue, did you ever get a reason why USDA decided to call it quits?
One, it's not in line with the current administration's goals and initiatives. The second piece I've heard is, folks saying this is COVID era funding. This is pandemic era funding. And one thing I do want to just make note of is that USDA has supported school nutrition programs in purchasing from farms really as long as the program's been around, but not necessarily those local next door farms. So school nutrition programs, I mentioned, they operate on participation. Students who participate, schools get that funding to be able to operate their programs. Another thing that school nutrition programs have access to is something called USDA Foods. And sometimes folks hear this called commodities. That's kind of an older name, but USDA Foods is the name that's used right now. And schools order USDA Foods on a yearly basis. So it's essentially like a gift card from the federal government. Schools then go and they purchase this domestically grown food, which is great. It's American grown product, but you don't necessarily know where it's coming from in the U.S. So here in Wisconsin, we be getting food from all over. Why the LFS or LFCC, Local Food for Schools and Childcare, was so important is because it allowed schools to be able to purchase from those neighbors, to be able to purchase those regionally specific ingredients. So what we're purchasing here in Wisconsin can look different when what's being purchased in Arizona than what's being purchased out on the East Coast. But it was allowing that regional support. And so when folks say, well, it was a COVID era program, I kind of want to make the argument that it's almost like the USDA Foods program that schools have had access to for years, but it's got that local impact piece, which is so important. And that regional, those regional foods and being able to bring in those regional foods to be able to serve them to kids and have kids make that connection with, hey, that's my neighbor. Hey, that's my farmer down the street that grew that product and brought it into my school. I want to make it clear that, this funding cut doesn't mean that schools cannot purchase local. It just makes it so much harder for them to be able to do it.
In a separate interview, we talked to the Ashwaubenon School District's nutrition director about the dollars and cents behind it all. You can find that on our podcast page at MidwestFarmReport.com. Allison Pfaff Harris joining us today. She's the Farm to School Director at REAP Food Group. This is the organization that works to connect farmers to local markets in southern Wisconsin. They're asking the federal government to reverse their decision to cancel the Local Food for Schools program. They're also looking for a state alternative to keep those farm-to-school dollars going to school districts. For the Midwest Farm Report, I'm Stephanie Hoff.